Hello, I am Williams, and this is the presentation for Counterventions, a reparative reflection on interventionist HCI, presented to the CHI 2023 conference in Hamburg. My co-authors are LouAnne Boyd and Juan Gilbert. In this paper, when we mention disability, we are describing a broad category of people who experience disablement through societal bias, barriers, and medical forms of stigma and harm. When we say reparative in this work, which we want you to avoid connotations of repair or restoration, it is also different from reparations from Black feminism. Although the terms are related and the theory is related, this is a particular form of reading, reintegrating conflicting narratives within the self. So I'm going to be brief here about the history of HCI and disability, and the paper itself is much more nuanced. And so if you find this slide too provocative, please take a deep breath and go read the paper. Dominantly, the narrative about disability in HCI has been one of charity, in the sense that we can bestow rehabilitation and a normative life onto a disabled body through a technological intervention. And this is very much a techno-benevolence kind of outlook, which if you read the work of Ruha Benjamin, techno-benevolence actually is a form of violence. We also tend to frame projects in terms of mutual beneficence. And by this, I mean to think, oh, what a great opportunity for us to simultaneously develop the technologies that we're interested in and provide some kind of service to these underprivileged groups. Disability is often viewed as an edge case for innovation. So like the extreme case where we might find new ways of designing systems and technologies, in the same way that scientists often view the bottom of the ocean or the extremes of space as an edge case for technology. Most of this drives us towards the idea of intervention, the idea of restoring a body to some kind of idealized norm, even if that body never occupied that norm in the first place. In autism research and HCI, that intervention is the single story. Intervention is the common thread that justifies and legitimizes all projects. And how can we come up with new stories? We can turn to counter narratives. And how do we build counter narratives in our research is through a reparative reading of past research. Now, the paper goes into more detail about participatory design and other forms of participant centering method in research. And obviously, this would be a thread of HCI research that is usually not interventionist, but actually very oftentimes still is. Counterventions are not a replacement for, or a critique of, or a substitute of participatory method. It is just a companion method that sort of targets the researcher themselves. Reparative readings, these are a tool for HCI researchers who wish to integrate the knowledge that their work could have happened differently from the way that it actually did, with a directed sense of alternative actions going forward. I am bringing reparative readings in from queer theory and from Black feminism as ways of oscillating in between the critical position, which is often regarded as paranoid, not in the sense of delusional, but in the sense that it is constantly on the lookout for potential harms. That paranoia or that critical outlook serves a purpose, but it doesn't serve all purposes. And so then we need to oscillate to another position, reparative position, in which we try to take, okay, here are all of the potential harms, and how do we reimagine a future in which they don't occur or don't have to occur anymore. And so you understand during a reparative reading that the harm that was done was not actually inevitable and that we can do better. So for our example of a reparative reading of an interventionist HCI arc, we chose 4 projects from LouAnne's prior body of work. We chose these 4 because they showed a progression both in the technologies involved and in the methods that move from a clinician-first interventionist approach to a more disability-centered and disability-led kind of approach. So the first project was a project called Say What, in which LouAnne worked from her own clinical background to design a technology that could inform autistic people when their prosody was off in such a way that they could adjust it in real time to have a better conversation with someone. And so in this project, the target for behavior change was the autistic user, and it was based on a clinical presumption of what the problem with interpersonal communication is. During this project, LouAnne realized through interactions with the participants that it wasn't necessarily an effective approach, and also it wasn't necessarily what somebody would have asked for. And that project was really part of what started LouAnne's process of reevaluation. The next project was ProCom, which was very technologically mediated behavioral intervention. Device would inform the autistic user when they were too close or too far away for whatever kind of conversation would have been appropriate. These technologies could mediate communication between people with not necessarily focusing on the autistic person as the problem. And so both users, both a neurotypical person and a neurodivergent person, were wearing the same device with the same programming in it. It didn't necessarily make autistic people more likely to be better at turn taking. What it actually did was it made the neurotypical person more patient, give the autistic person the space they needed to speak their turn. In VR sensory, and actually is still thinking about interpersonal relationships in a mixed neurotype dyad, but instead of thinking about how do we inform people about their social behaviors so that they might theoretically change that behavior, it's actually about how can these two interlocutors co-construct the environment in a way that makes them both comfortable enough to play with each other. So there's no idea of enforced behavior here. They actually get full control over the sensory environment in virtual reality. And this is actually providing a space of collaborative play where conversations can happen. So the purpose of this reparative reading of this arc is to see not only how mistakes were made, but actually about how those projects themselves actually had within them, both in the papers and in the recollections of the experience of working on those projects, had within them moments that could answer to the mistakes that were made and the alternatives for the future. And so through these reparative readings, we come up with these traits or characteristics, like a counterventional project would articulate the researcher's journey of reflexive engagement with the participant community. So we talk about reflexive research all the time. We talk about reflection in participation, and we talk about reflexive design. But what we don't often do is actually describe that process and that journey and how we move from a position where we don't know what we don't know to one where we are in more authentic community with the people that we're trying to work with. A counterventional project would also reorient the project to critically examine the disconnects between intervention and participant desires. So in the same way that Say What was oriented towards the autistic user, VR Social was oriented outward towards the environment. And so a countervention would intentionally point this lens away from the idea of the disabled body as the target of intervention and towards society and even often the researchers themselves. A counterventional project would also identify who is burdened by project expectations. And this helps you interrogate the political entanglements that construct the intervention domain. So intervention is often dominated by ideas about what is normal and desirable. And this gets reified in our projects by which user is actually burdened by the expectation of change. A counterventional project would also explain how it's performing a self-critique or a critique that is oriented onto institutions or disciplines or legacies of hegemony. And a countervention would prioritize participant experience and testimony in the evaluation of outcomes. Opportunity to use participant testimony, both verbal and embodied, to better contextualize the quantitative results that we pull out of measures and to get a better sense of when are we seeing a conflict, and in those moments of conflict that we should believe the participant over the numbers. We are open to asynchronous questions, and there's a platform for that Kai is providing, and also I am chronically online. My handle is usually Fractal Echo